Queen Victoria rules the largest empire the world has ever seen. India sits as its crown jewel, but that title means little on the subcontinent, and in the city of Meerut, discontent will spark a war. Called on to fight in a foreign war over which they have no interest, the armies of India will instead turn their guns on their British overlords. As a century of abuse boils over into violence, one of the most vicious and bloody years in India's history will unravel. The Indian Mutiny has risen, and this is its story. My name is Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co host, Coleman. And this is the Historical Humans Podcast. And if that lovely intro didn't give you an idea, we are going to be talking about the Sepoy Mutiny, aka the Indian Mutiny, or the First War of Independence, where India starts striking back at the British, and boy, oh boy, do they really make an effort.
Oh yeah, it's a very interesting time in India when this happens. This is a very dark event that occurs, and just from all the different names, you can kind of tell there's multiple iterations of historians who have kind of tried to revise things and make it fit the narrative of the times. Just that's why there's so many names for this, is because about every 50 years or so, the paradigm will shift and there'll be a new story about what really happened during this mutiny.
I mean, that's British History 101. The second a
Yep.
new regime comes back, they start honoring the previous one and they start changing some of the small facts to where
Yeah.
it may not have been a massacre or a mutiny. Instead, it was something more. It was something larger that the valiant British Army put down.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, no matter what version of this you look at, it is a widespread rebellion across India against British rule. This is the various peoples of India trying to get rid of the British. That is at the fundamental core of this rebellion from 1857 until the last group gets put down in 1859.
So
And
that's right
oh,
in the heart of Queen Vicky's time.
yeah, yeah, this is the Victorian period. This is gonna actually be a very defining moment for a lot of things that we associate with Queen Victoria. Later on, it comes out of the British response to the aftermath of this event.
I said it in our pre-show walkthrough, but something I think is a huge importance here is I truly believe that something like this is a direct response of the Americans. And I know we like to self-import, make ourselves overly important, but when the American colonies revolted, we are the first British colony to have successfully done so. And once they lost one of their largest land holdings, they took an iron fist approach to the rest of the kingdom. To the empire. They started squeezing all their colonies for everything they're worth, and that unfortunately included India.
Yeah. And what happens here is probably less about the Americanisms inspiring uprisings. This is not Ireland 1798. What this is more of is corporate greed, because Britain does not directly administer India. Instead, it's found this wonderful new thing called capitalism and has decided to give the entire country of India to the East India Company to run on behalf of the British government. Now, being a corporation, they are stupid. See, they've been tasked with maintaining order and control over this entire subcontinent. That's expensive. British soldiers are expensive. You have to pay them British wages. You have to import them from Britain and travel them all across the world to get here. But do you know what there's an abundance of in India? The Indians.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them, and when you mobilize a large group like that, it doesn't tend to end well for the oppressor.
Yeah. So the East India Company's solution to maintaining peace in India is to hire and arm Indians to enforce British laws on other Indians.
Well, because if we know anything about a subservient population, is that they love enforcing those rules on others.
Yep.
Because if not me, then them.
Yep. And these troops are called sepoys. And that's why this gets nicknamed the Sepoy Mutiny, because these are the people who are finally going to say enough is enough. And it just so happens that the British gave them all guns.
Oh, I haven't seen a blunder
Which,
like that since the Americans in Afghanistan.
yep. Which the Indians did not have until the British arrived.
Hey there, old chap. Would you mind just holding this and protecting my holdings? Yeah, sure. All right, we'll be back. Wait, why is that pointed at me?
Yep. Now, the reason why the Sepoys even have a reason to rebel, aside from just the general desire for autonomy, is because there's been about 40 years of rule by the British at this point, going all the way back to 1820 when the British started doing things to make life harder for India and mostly on purpose. Uh,
That's what I
with
was referring to earlier.
yeah, the British in 1820 implement a policy called paramountcy. And what this means is that Britain must be the first and primary consideration of anything involving India's economic structure, political landscape, and cultural practices. They must all be put into the view of how does this benefit Britain and how can this be made more British? If it
That's
can't be that way, it doesn't get to exist.
that's a very British way of thinking about it.
Yep. The reason why the British are able to get away with putting in a lot of these policies and why they're able to expand on so many of them is because India isn't India at this time. India is comprised of the Hindu princely states, which are a series of independent kingdoms of varying sizes and distinct ethnicities and demographics that all sort of compete with each other for territory, wealth, prestige. If it exists, they will fight among themselves for it. And the British like to play them against each other.
Of course.
Now, what the British have done to establish their control over these states is what is called subsidiary alliances, which is early corporate speak for vassal state. As the British are kind of the main military and economic force within these princely states. And the British, as of 1820, decide that having India as a subservient vassal that they can extort for cash at will isn't good enough.
No, why would it be?
They want more control. They
Naturally.
want to see India become England.
That sounds very French of them.
Yep. Yeah, but not in the French way where they make you like a citizen and give you rights and shit, which is on a very rare occasion even with the French. No,
Yeah,
this is the British way.
by force and gunpowder.
Yep. Yep. Which is starts by doing a what would you call it? A very Chicago thing. You start a protection racket.
Hey, that's pretty mob esque. This was before Chicago really delved into it. This came
Yeah.
before. We perfected it, but this came before.
This is this is they go around to each of the individual princely states, mug one of them, and then say, "See, all these horrible things happen to your nice stuff. Wouldn't it be a shame if it happened again?"
Oh, it sure would be a shame if something happened to it. It sure would.
Yep.
As the like torches flickering in the background.
To make this easier, the British start replacing all of the prominent Hindu princes whose families have held power for 1,000 years with British bureaucrats appointed from England, salaried by the East India Company, and absolutely willing to do whatever it takes to get that bottom line.
God, they're the first middle management. That is awful.
Yeah,
That is
it is awful.
awful.
It is awful. And here's the thing: nepotism is real. And people have too many cousins and in laws and shit that there's not enough jobs for the British bureaucrats. So, how do we create more jobs? We force the old management out. We implement the doctrine of lapse. What this is it says that a Indian Hindu princely state here in India can only be passed from a biological father to their biological son. If no biological son exists, then that Hindu princely state becomes property of the East India Company.
So they gave themselves the ultimate out clause that allowed those that maintain the male bloodline a constant and forever
Yep.
system. But then the second that went out, they were just like, hey, you know what? That's ours.
Yep.
I'll take
Now,
that. You can't have a woman lead.
yeah. Now the thing with the Hindu princely states is a lot of them didn't have direct patrilineal inheritance for the kingdom. A lot of them also had a very common practice of adoption, during which the adopted child would be considered a blood child by the Hindu princely state, but not by the British. This is because, these royal families do engage in a lot of murder, and sometimes it is beneficial to shift the crown laterally as opposed to just straight down. And this rule, this doctrine, gets put into effect in 1848, and it dispossesses the Brahmin social class. This is the highest social class in India. These are the rulers and the priests. These are the people that would be like the Gandhis and the Chagandrupas of India. These are where those people come from. These are your kings. These are your holy men. And they are very, very angry.
Shit, you would be too, I feel.
Yep. To go with this replacement of the upper strata of society, which you can do and not cause too much discontent among the general populace, because what's one asshole in charge versus another. To go with this, the British decide that they're going to introduce Western religion and education. That's right. You must now be Christian, and
Ah,
you must
jeez.
learn in English only.
And look at the downside of that now.
Yep. Yep. Now, this is quite rightly seen as an attempt to destroy India's social structure. It's seen as Britishization. It's seen as cultural erasure. It's seen as that, like, right out the gate. But the people of India are powerless to stop it. And so you've got all these people who are really upset with the way things are, and justifiably so. But there's one group that haven't been pissed off yet, and that's the warriors. These are the people that got the guns.
That's the last group you want to piss off, usually.
Yep. Yep. These are the sepoys. And The sepoys have a list of problems too. They consider themselves to be extremely mistreated. There is a wage gap between the sepoys and the British. Not only does a sepoy get paid significantly less than a British person of the same rank, doing the same exact job at the same exact post, but unlike the British, which received regular pay increases, the sepoys had not seen their salary change since the year 1800.
Which has been about 57 years at this point.
Yep. Yeah.
But Jesus, I know the American minimum wage has not gone up much in the past 2 decades. It's still $7.25 nationwide. Yep. But oh my gosh, I could not imagine that equivalency would be us being paid like 1960s paid wages. Like, pay me $2 an hour, I would also be pissed.
Yeah. The purchasing power of the sepoys had dropped by 50% at the onset of the rebellion, meaning that they were effectively making half as much money as they were in 1800.
So instead of making, $2 an hour, they're making more like $1 an hour in terms of purchasing power.
Yeah. And keep in mind, you're already starting at below minimum wage. This is a below minimum wage job.
Yeah, it's more, well, it's a double-edged sword, okay? Because when you look at military service, you do have to understand that part of that wage also includes 3 hots and a cot,
Oh yeah. But it's not just that. The British person getting that 3 hots and a cot taken out of their salary still gets paid significantly more.
I'm aware. I'm just talking about for like the population that signs up to be the sepoys usually come from disadvantaged, starving, traditionally pretty disadvantageous position in society. So they join the military, their food is covered, and they make a small underpaid wage, but it is still not it's a bad deal, don't get me wrong, but it's not the worst deal for them. But then when they look at their counterparts that are getting paid 3 times as much, I would also be rightfully pissed, especially when you probably are a better soldier than that guy wearing the fucking mustache and the red coat.
Yep. But don't worry, you'll never get to compare yourself to him because you're banned from being promoted. You cannot join the officer class.
Oh.
Meaning, good luck being a corporal at 50.
God, that feels like retail all over again. You literally cannot get promoted, and then some asshole who just walks into the job is in the managerial position.
Yep.
Oh, thanks. I hate it.
Yep. Now, what serves as the tipping point is the British decide in the 1850s here, in the 1857 or so, to impose on the sepoys the obligation to serve anywhere in the British Empire. This is not in the original contract. The sepoys signed up to serve as law and order on behalf of the British in India. They did not sign up to go fight in the Second Opium War over in China, which consequently had just broken out.
The modern equivalent to that is like signing up to work for TSA and then finding yourself in like Iraq.
Yeah.
You sign up to protect the homeland, and then next thing you know, you're off to a foreign land.
Yeah. To complicate matters further, at this time, for a lot of Indians, leaving and returning to India was seen as making oneself impure, and the ritual to purify oneself upon their return was extremely expensive. Foreign travel had this religious taboo attached to it. So, the British aren't footing that bill.
No, not if you're leaving to avoid service.
Yep. Now, all sorts of peaceful protests had been held by the sepoys, by the Brahmins, by the general population of India. The British unilaterally ignored it. If you were not killing a British person, they did not care. And there have been a number of small-scale uprisings beginning in 1806, but they're all crushed pretty quickly because it's only a handful of people in one location. The British can just pour weight of numbers down on top of it.
As was their strategy for much of their colonial
Yeah,
period.
yeah, it gets smothered. However, here in 1857, the rebellion's going to erupt in Bengal for two key reasons. And this is why this rebellion sticks. This is why it becomes the first war of independence, why it becomes the mutiny. The first reason is that Bengal is where a very large number of the sepoy troops were stationed.
Ooh.
And the second reason is being a military outfit, their discontent was very organized. They took the pre-existing social structure of an army and just applied rebellion to it.
That arguably makes them one of the worst enemies, though, to have, because,
Yep.
god damn it, when your enemy is well organized, well put together, and has pretty good logic and justification behind it, it's hard to really turn that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the other areas, the spiritualistic movements, the Brahmins, the various peasantry could really only agree that, yeah, the British suck. I don't like them too. They could never agree on a single course of action. The sepoys, however, do. See, the catalyst for all of this is, ironically enough, the Enfield rifle.
Really?
It is distributed to the troops here in Bengal. And the issue with the Enfield rifle is that in order to load it, you have to bite the cartridge before loading in order to tear off the ends. These cartridges are greased in fat.
Oh.
The particular fat that's being used, according to the rumor among the rank and file of the sepoys, was that of cows and pigs, because the British used those and the Indians didn't, and the British were being economical about it. Now, pigs and cows are sacred animals and or just completely freaking forbidden by Hindus and Muslims, respectively, there. And this was seen as the British trying to spiritually poison the sepoys, force them to be British Christians. These are the largest religions of India, and the introduction of this cartridge is seen as an absolute existential attack on the existence of India and its culture.
I
Now,
mean, that seems like a pretty poor calculation on a lot of the British's part, because religion is probably the one thing that could, in theory, combat the British Empire despite their best efforts.
yep. Now, for the British's credit, there's no evidence that cow or pig is being used in the production of these cartridges. However, they repeatedly ignore complaints from the sepoys to the point of telling them to deal with it or die.
Yeah, that's not a great response.
Yeah. And this boils over in March of 1857 with a man named Mangal Pandey. He's a sepoy, and he's arrested for attempting to beat the shit out of his officer, his British officer, over the cartridges.
Wow. Good
The
for him,
British,
but also I know it's not going to end well.
yeah, the British execute him
There it is.
for insubordination. They then round up every sepoy that was stationed at the same location as him and proceed to flog them. This is the final chance for the British to do anything. It's the final warning sign that something needs to be done. And instead, they double down on hurting people. They double down on fear and pain.
Well, yeah, it's the biggest suppressor that they have. People who are afraid or who are injured are not as likely to speak up as someone who is very, very in tune with their fate.
Yep. Yep. Now, the second thing that happens is in April, the garrison at Meerut is issued the Enfield rifle. They refuse to touch it. They are all sentenced to prison for 10 years.
Holy!
In addition to this, they are bound, chained, and paraded.
They really wanted to make an example of anyone who dissented.
Yep. This backfires hilariously because on May 10th, 1857, word reaches the other Sepoy units about what's happened with Panday and the garrison at Meerut. And on May 10th, 45 of the 74 Sepoy regiments load their guns and shoot their officers.
Honestly, good for them.
Yep. The British respond by disbanding all but 5 Sepoy regiments. The 5 that they felt they had the most control over and or couldn't effectively administer anything without. But the damage is already done. You have a 45 regiment army currently marching to Delhi to free the Meerut garrison to add to their numbers.
Not to mention,
Delhi
don't they?
makes...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, what?
I was gonna say, not to mention, don't they also restore the former Mughal emperor back to power as well?
Oh, they do. Delhi is the ideal choice for them because not only does it have the Meerut garrison in it, the Meerut garrison is not accompanied by any British soldiers.
Oh,
So
that's a big oversight on the British's part. What the hell?
there's no army to oppose them. There's just a handful of British officers.
Which those we seem to find are pretty vulnerable to grape shot.
Yep. Yep. The other thing that Delhi has is Bahadur Shah II, the last Mughal emperor who they restore to power.
God, we love when the Mughal Empire comes back in this episode, as if we haven't talked about it quite a few times in the past.
Yep. They also start a bit of an issue of mob violence that will basically be going on throughout the rest of the mutiny from both sides. The anger at all the Anglicization that's going on, all the Britishization, boils over and they just attack anything that seems English, whether it's Christian converts, British civilians, anything. If it doesn't look traditionally Indian, it gets shot.
Yikes.
And they massacre a lot of people. This horrifies the British. And a lot of sources, being of British origin, kind of gloss over the next part of this, which effectively amounts to, in their words, the Indians started the practice of targeting civilians and engaging in brutalistic responses, which the British returned in excess. But it's okay because some of the British officers felt mildly discomforted by it and objected. And even though it was horribly excessive what the British will do in return, remember, India brought it on itself. So many sources were like that. And we won't get into a lot of the details of what happens because what effectively is going to happen is for the next year and a half, we have a bunch of armies roaming around northern and central India, killing anyone who either is Indian or who is British, depending on which one you ran across.
Oh man, so they were really out for blood, both sides.
Yeah, everyone's out for blood. It becomes a we killed them because you killed these people because we killed those people because you did this. It becomes this tit for tat, kindergarten slap fight with
Yeah.
just human bodies.
Well, at the very least, did any of the Indian lords or nobility join in besides the emperor?
Surprisingly enough, no. Almost no one who still has anything joins in.
Oh, they must see the writing on the walls of, hey, it sucks, but the British are here. And then also, with that being said, we've already talked about how the British would just straight up eminent domain certain fiefdoms.
Yep. And there's two people that back this rebellion that are prominent enough to be really noticed. The first is the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II, and
Mhm.
his whole family. His sons get into it. His whole family joins in the rebellion. This is their last chance to restore the Mughal Empire. They're taking it.
Yeah, they're gonna Kaiser Wilhelm their way back into power, except they're gonna be mildly successful, more than
Yep.
he was.
The second is a man named Nana Sahib, who is put in charge of the military aspect of this rebellion.
Oh,
Now, Sahib here was the adopted son of the Peshwa of the Maratha Empire.
so
So it's
he
another
lost
one
his
of the
positions.
it's another one of the Hindu princely state, and his father lost his position because Sahib's adopted. So the British just took everything, and Sahib seems to have taken it personally.
Okay, can we also pause real quick here to just point out how awesome it is that they would actively embrace adoption and that they didn't see any difference for it? It was the fucking British that had an issue with it.
Yep. Yeah, the British who can't even handle their own mandates, much
Yeah,
less those of another people.
the wonderful Indian man is like, yes, this is my son. He may not be my blood, but he is my son. And the British are like, he doesn't look like you, but he looks too much like you. Death.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was. You didn't have a son yesterday. Shoots him. Anyone else have questions?
Oh
But yeah,
God.
the reason why so many of the lords stay out of it, so many of the princely states, they're remaining either dispossessed or still in power. You know, people stay out is because of the sheer amount of lawlessness and violence that gets involved right at the onset. The massacre of Delhi sets the tone,
Ooh, not a
and
great
the
sound.
British will retaliate tenfold. For every British person who dies, we will see, I think, upwards of 100 Indians.
Jeez, that is atrocious numbers.
Yeah, it is pretty bad. Now, the British, for their part, at the onset of this rebellion, they managed to hold on to two key centers, which, if these went up in flames with Delhi, they would be gone because they've lost Bengal, they've lost Delhi, they've lost Meerut, but they hold on to Madras and Mumbai. And they are very fortunate to have held on to these two strongholds. These are the two other places where the British military is strong. And here it's actually British people. There's enough actually British soldiers to hold out because as soon as the massacre of Delhi happens, rebellion everywhere. Most of central and northern India takes up arms. The peasants take up arms. There's blood in the water, and for the first time in nearly 60 years, the British have shown weakness.
It's the first like chink in the armor, the first real sign of a weakness. So
Yep.
pretty much everyone in a 1,000 mile radius of them saw this and smelt the blood in the water and decided to pounce.
Yeah. The white man bleeds, the white man can die is effectively the frenzy.
I mean, they're
And
not
they really
inaccurate.
they really go off on it. The Ganges and Narmada valleys become a hotspot for the rebellion. Most of northern and central India, which is, kind of centered around these areas, they have nothing left to lose. Their lords have been deposed. They are living on their knees. They are forced to do everything the British way. They pay more taxes to live in their land. They pay more for everything to live in their land, and they get paid less for the work they do.
It's not a great system, admittedly.
No, it's pretty bad. And so they just throw everything they have into it, just entire populations just pick up a rock and start running.
Yeah.
Now, the East India Company, they're not out of the fight yet. They've got some allies that they bring in to counter this rebellion, what was effectively the East India Company's main military force. The first is the good old British Regular Army.
Oh, jeez.
Yep. Getting ready to drive a Saracen through your garden.
That's just annoying because that's like when they call in their older brother, and their older
Yep.
brother brings his friends, and you're just completely outmatched.
Yep. But now keep in mind, the British East India Company still has this understanding about the value of British life. So, to make up the front ranks of shit, they bring in, through effectively mercenary contracts, the Sikhs and Gurkhas of Nepal to sort of form that nice little front line to make sure all the pretty British people don't actually get blood on them.
It's a bad thing when you're bringing in other religions into this to fight it, like the Sikhs and the Gurkhas. That's just you're playing with pawns at that point. You're hiring out another repressed group to fight on your behest.
Yep. And the thing about the Sikhs is, unlike the Sepoys, the Sikhs have a very long, very prominent history of militarization.
Oh, so they're actually good at doing war.
As I understand it, the Sikh religion forbids being unarmed at any time.
Interesting.
These are some Genghis Khan. These people are ready for the coming of Genghis Khan. That is how they live.
I mean, shit. When you got
Now,
a bunch of British people walking around your island, I would too.
yep. Now, there's a 6-day battle in September of 1857 where this combined military force descends on Delhi and retakes it.
Wow.
It is not pretty. It is vicious. It's not even a siege. It's just block by block, district by district warfare. This is advancing into Berlin at the end of World War II kind of fighting.
Yeah.
It's not fun for anyone.
I wonder why. You're fighting war against war, and unfortunately, the British gained a lot of experience in other parts of the world and realized, hey, it's a pretty easy thing to pin these repressed groups against themselves. So hey, let me just outsource this while I wait for my own reinforcements coming back from the motherland.
Yep. And in March of 1858, they take Kanpur and Lucknow. These were two other major centers for the rebellion. This is effectively breaking the rebellion's back at this point through overwhelming, targeted violence.
Ah,
And that's really what does it in for this mutiny, for the rebellion here. The various rebels have so many internal divisions that they can't coordinate a response to British retaliation. Delhi stands alone. against the British. So does Campur. So does Lucknow. Forces do not redeploy to aid one another.
Oh, that's not a great thing to do when you're having a rebellion. It's where the 13 colonies actually had something going for them.
Yep. And the reason for this is each area, each locality had different goals for the rebellion, had different issues they wanted addressed, had a different idea of what a post British India should look like. And they want everything from the total resurrection of the Mughal Empire
Understandable.
to fire the tax man.
God, okay. It sounds funny in retrospect, and it is. But imagine how awful the tax collector was for a local region. That is their top demand from the British is I don't care. I just want this man in particular gone.
Yep. Yep. And so this really, screws up because they can't agree on an end goal. They don't know who or what should replace the British. They don't know how far the fighting should go. There is no unified India. There is no nationalist movement to bind them together. It's the Mughals here, the Marathas there, the Bengals there. Delhi's doing its own damn thing. So there's no coordination. And because of this, the rebellion just crumples under the superior resources that the East India Company is able to bring.
Well, yeah, when you
In
have an
spring,
unlimited purse and a whole lot of coordination, a lot of things get easier.
yep. By spring of 1858, 40,000 British troops, British regular soldiers, had been shipped into India to put down the mutiny. And it works. The East India Company declares that peace is restored in June of 1858. Pockets of violence and resistance will continue until the next year, but it's peasants with knives and guns. It's scattered. They hold no major population centers. They control no key roads. They have no infrastructure. And to ensure that they don't get any infrastructure, Queen Victoria personally intervenes by declaring a full pardon and amnesty to all the rebels if they stand down. With this comes a promise of religious tolerance, the first guarantee of it anyone in India has. So the Hindus and the Muslims of India would be allowed to practice their religion. And she did guarantee certain rights to the Indian princes so that they would not consider throwing their support behind this dying rebellion. It's token stuff, really, but it is better than what was going on before the mutiny.
It's also surprising that it had such a significant um, amnesty, honestly, like the amount of amnesty that Vic offered them, I think is just unmatched by pretty much any other mutiny or rebellion in history. I mean, they paid a toll, for, absolutely for sure, especially when we eventually go to the casualties. But
Yeah. And I think that brutality is what prompts a lot of this amnesty because there is extreme violence going on and it's not stopping. And so it becomes clear that, you know, this massive population of people is willing to run into your bayonets more so than just live under your banner.
and that was not something they experienced with the Opium Wars, where the Chinese did eventually relent.
Yep.
Granted, they relented under a massive coalition, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. And the casualties are dramatically one sided. Between the British and the Indian casualties, it's about 80-1 in favor of the British.
God. So, if we're gonna go with the numbers, that there were 11,000 British soldiers who were killed in the conflict, that equates to 800,000 Indians.
Yep. 800,000 Indians died.
Oh,
And the reason the distinction is British soldiers versus Indians is because the Indians did not have a lot of non-British people who weren't, or didn't have a lot of British people who weren't soldiers to shoot at. Whereas the British people had an abundance of target practice
yikes.
that they happily engaged in
And
daily.
for reference, for my Americans playing at home, roughly 680,000 Americans died during the American Civil War, about 600,000 during Vietnam. So this is 120,000 more than those figures.
Yep. This is 13 months of daily massacres.
Wow. Oh, so 13 months. Let's crunch the numbers on that. 800,000 divided by 13. You're talking about 61,538 deaths per month.
Yep. Some months would have been higher than others. Like, for example, September of 1857 and March of 1858 would have been significantly bloodier because those are the months in which major rebellion strongholds fell. And it was not above the British to spend some time taking a victory lap after mercilessly gunning down every single defender.
I mean, you're talking a fatality rate of over 1,000 people per day on average.
Yep. Most of the Indian people who died were civilians, and they either starved to death because there was no food because of all the war and destruction, or they died to various British atrocities. Um, as you know, if you're not absolutely loyal, you're dead. And do you know how we tell whether you're absolutely loyal? Whether or not you live through the first bullet.
Oh God.
It's yeah, things get pretty bad. Um, the Sepoys do commit the first recognized atrocity during their taking of Delhi, but the British response is again beyond disproportionate. In
Yeah.
fact, the British kill so many people that their own command back in England issues an edict limiting the number of people that the British regiments can kill.
Because they just had a field day, like you said, literal fucking just target practice.
The British Army says, stop shooting. They never give that order.
Sorry, I can't hear you while I'm reloading my rifle.
Yep.
That
Just
is
like,
insane.
yeah.
And then, of course, the British, despite showing amnesty to all the soldiers, I guarantee they dropped a hard hammer on the leaders. Or perceived
Oh,
leaders because they're the ones that posed a credible threat.
oh, yes. All the prominent leaders of the mutiny are killed in battle or executed by the British. Only Bahadur Shah II is allowed to live. He is sent to exile in Burma, and that is only after all his sons are executed by the British to ensure that his kingdom falls into the doctrine of lapse and becomes fully British with his eventual death.
Well, arguably, they could even make that claim with him being exiled because he's doing
Yeah.
it in absentee.
Oh yeah, they administer on his behalf.
God. Oh, if they did it as a power move, of course.
Yeah. And honestly, letting him live is kind of more of a jerk move because not only does he get to see his country disappear, but you also get to let him live with the knowledge that these people murdered every single person who he loved. Everyone you love has just been murdered, and you're forced to linger on.
Tell me how
That's
they're
not
not
mercy.
villains.
That's not mercy.
Tell me how they're not villains in this story though. Like that is absurd. That is villainous where you are eliminating the bloodline and watching the man watch his kingdom wither away.
Yeah. They the British are absolutely evil during this mutiny. This is one of the most vicious years in India's history. this this is arguably the single like bloodiest thing that happens.
Well, and my favorite part of this, and I use the term favorite kind of loosely, is the fact that the British government had such a vicious recoil to the idea of this mutiny that they just straight up dissolved the East India Company from controlling this area.
Yep. Yep. They annex India in August of 1858. And the reason for this is the East India Company, through the mutiny, had just waged war in the name of the British Crown. Britain did not like that. And they said, you are a company. Your job is to make money for England, not start wars with our name on it. And so Britain rightfully felt that the East India Company did not have the right to do this. And so they disbanded. This process lasts from 1858 until 1895, as the East India Company is so goddamn massive that the British have to slowly phase it out, territory by territory, sector by sector.
I mean, it had such a long-standing monopoly in this region that you have to peel back the layers of an onion just to get at it. They couldn't outright absorb it, and it was so convolutedly structured that they really had to analyze every last aspect of it.
Yep. Now, the British take one lesson away from the Indian Mutiny, and it's not treat people better.
No, that's the last lesson they'll ever learn.
What they look at it is they say this rebellion occurred due to administrative errors in the previous government.
God, and they blame the last guys.
Yep. Therefore, we will change how that government is structured for the purposes of reducing the capacity for these people to fight us. So they look for flaws in how the East India Company did things. East India Company is at fault. East India Company killed those 800,000 people. East India Company sparked this rebellion.
Well, gee, I wonder who the East India Company was working on behest of.
The British here are here to help you. We're here to rebuild. It's been a lawless year. Wouldn't you just love some governance, some stability, some order? All you have to do is bow. Bow to me.
Okay, your D&D's coming out, and
that is fucking Queen Victoria in this right here.
You know, Vic had quite the nasty streak to her. Let's not cut her any slack.
Yeah. It in 1874 they institute direct rule called the British Raj, in which the British government is directly controlling everything in India. That's how long it takes just to get India. 1858 to 1874 is the frickin' transition period.
And that would go on to be maintained until what, 1949? I think is when they officially gained their own independence.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 1947.
47
is when the Raj ends. Yes, yeah, I just checked it.
God, that lasted forever. And like, the crazy thing in my mind is how big of a country India is, how rich they are in natural resources, and just how tight of a control that the British held over them, and just how much, you know, it's oftentimes called the crown jewel of England. And part of that is one of the jewels on the British crown, the modern day one that was worn by Queen Lizzie and now was eventually adapted for Charles, has gemstones that were looted from India at this time period. I mean, yep. Victoria was such a fan of these gems that she just absorbed all of them.
Yep. To cement British direct rule and the Raj over India, the British declare Queen Victoria to be Empress of India. This has several things. First, it gives them an excuse to give Queen Victoria all those gemstones. The second thing it does is it establishes a fake sense of continuity with the Indian states prior to the East India Company. She's the Empress of India. You've the people of India are used to being ruled by emperors, Maratha, Mughal, all these different kingdoms, and they host a big parade for her too, in which she is not present. It's just an empty carriage, in the traditional Indian style, to announce this. And this is all because of this war. It implements the British Raj. Queen Victoria has to justify the British Raj, and so I'm not just the Queen of England, I'm the Empress of India.
It was also during this time that you saw a very stark deviation from British empirical policy, basically, because it was around the time that they officially absorbed the India. I mean, 1858 is when they took control. They granted Canada its independence in 1867 with the British North America Act. Australia would go on to get its independence in the 1890s. I mean, they really, in quick succession, gave up a lot of their territorial holdings in favor of what they had in India. And I'm not fully unconvinced that this is because they managed to gain access to tea trade in China with their settlement in Hong Kong and large amounts of agricultural fields and mass amounts of labor in India.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, with the Second Opium War that breaks out to sort of provide the kickstart to this mutiny, the British were forcing India to grow the opium that was the subject of that war.
Oh yeah, we forgot about that. Where they grew the
Yeah.
opium in India and then would trade it to the Chinese, get them hooked to it, addicted, just so they could eventually open up trade and get what they wanted as a result.
And if you're wondering why the famine was so bad during the mutiny, the British had converted some very necessary subsistence farmland to opium growing. So there wasn't enough farmland in India to feed India.
Which is insane because a lot of the farm fields in India consisted of things like rice, which is very easy to grow a large caloric dense agriculture in 1 acre of land. Just the fact that you convert these fields that were used for food into this. And also, we're talking about the same time period. Guess what kicked off just before this whole thing really started firing off? This was also during the time of the Irish potato famine, so the British were well versed with famine at this point.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well versed with causing them. And with India, you know, 200 million people. Even with something the size of India, that's not easy to feed.
No, and the British really didn't care when they started converting food and agriculture fields into production fields. And then they
Yep.
were conscripting the rest into the military, and anyone else who wasn't a part of it just kind of fell to the wayside. I mean, they
Yeah.
became a part of the imperial machine.
Yep. You were in the words of quintessential British person Ebenezer Scrooge, the excess population.
It's interesting to me, and to kind of bring this full circle, this is why I brought up the American comparison, because the Americans and British fought a brutal and long revolutionary war that the Americans would eventually gain their independence from, partially in tune thanks to Napoleon gaining power and the British getting distracted. But the British came back. The British started impressing American ships, they started stealing soldiers, claiming they were deserters of the Royal Navy if they had served prior to the Revolutionary War, and a whole slew of other things. And they did not employ nearly as much violence and nearly as much just downright war crimes against the Americans like they did the Indians.
Yep. No. No, there's definitely a racial component involved. You see it when comparing the Sepoy Mutiny here to the American Revolution. You see it also in like we mentioned earlier, which colonies they were willing to grant semi-autonomous status to. The ones that were mostly white, like you do not see British South Africa getting this treatment.
No, but they were still pretty well subjugated at this point, and shortly after Britain gains full control, is when you see fighting in the Boer Wars. So you start
Yep.
seeing the Dutch Boers fighting against the British over certain areas like the Orange Free State and other areas within South Africa.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But a very interesting topic and a fun one to talk about. The Indian Mutiny doesn't tend to be brought up very much. And one of the things that I think we should highlight as we wrap up this episode is just how much history can give a biased perspective.
Oh
Because
yeah.
when researching this topic in particular, a lot of the documentations came directly from the British and had softened some of the language as time went on. And as generations passed, the language just started tweaking and shifting
Yep.
ever so slightly.
Yeah. The a good point of this is a lot of the sources are extremely detailed in how this happened, from say the roots all the way back in 1800 up through the initial massacre at Delhi, and then it said, and the British retaliated a bit excessively at times until they won. The entire actual freaking war, everything after May of 1857 gets skipped.
And that, my friends, has been the Indian Mutiny. Let us know what your thoughts are down below. And we will see you guys in the next episode, which I will give a small spoiler to because I love doing that.
Yeah.
We are going to be talking about our second favorite proto hominid, the Homo floresiensis, or the hobbits.
Yep.
Ooh.
Yay, copyrighted word. Here we come. Tolkien estate.
It's not like the Tolkien estate is very litigious.
No,
Anyways,
not at
before
all.
we get sued, thank you guys for watching and be sure to tune in next time when we talk about some proto humans. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later.